Freudian analysts. So that was very much my background at that time. And then in 1980, I had a heart attack and had a near-death experience. And that changed very much how I saw everything in my life. I started studying the North American Indian paradigm. That I found something that spoke to my condition, as the Quakers say. I left the Arbors Association, left London, came up to Sheffield, working in Sheffield because my wife was working in Manchester, I was living in Buxton, and my son was very unhappy at the school in Buxton where he was at. And so we looked around and found a Steiner school in Sheffield. So I was bringing him over to the Steiner school. This would have been 86. Bringing him over to the Steiner school. And rather than going back and trying to get a practice going in Buxton, I stayed here in Sheffield. And that's how my Sheffield practice has started. So I've been, I was doing a training tutor for training GPs. In fact, that's how we met, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Did that for a dozen years or so. But basically, it's a private practice that I have in Sheffield. That's my main work. But I also use that North American Indian paradigm that I've been studying. I've used that a great deal in my therapy. So I call myself a psychotherapist and a shamanic counsellor. So, yeah.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. Yeah.
So Colin and I were talking one day, and we were talking about this notion of how we see the fear encroaching upon practice in our supervisees. And I was commenting that when I was training, I remember an analyst spending a whole tutorial just telling us about the mistakes he had made. And the sense of relief that gave me at the time, of that, here was this really experienced analyst who had written books, and he made fundamental mistakes. He made really crass mistakes and could tell us about it, and that put somehow things into perspective for me and helped me a great deal. And my first supervisor, in fact, I think it was our very first, the way it worked then was that I had one client with one supervisor for a year. Before I could have my second client at the end of at the end of that year. Okay. So I went for my first supervision with him, and he said, "What do you call yourself?" And I said, "Psychotherapist." I've, got the certificate now.
Yeah, it's on the wall.
Yeah. He said, "No, you can't call yourself a psychotherapist until you've made your first 1,000 mistakes." So again, it was something that was in the air at the time, and that helped me a great deal. That knowing that I'm allowed to make mistakes, and certainly within the shamanic paradigm that I was talking about. There is a different notion of making mistakes than we have at the moment in our society. And so we were just talking about it, and I was saying, what a shame that students can't get the experience of two old blokes like us. And that, we've got a wealth of mistakes between us. I think we worked out nearly 70 years of mistakes between us.
That's quite a thought, really, when you try and
it's frightening. Should have been drummed out years ago.
So we thought we would put that forward as first of all the idea of just having people that we could just tell our mistakes to, and then out of that came the idea of a workshop and so on.
Because the original notion was possibly coming into an existing course, say at Temenos, and doing an afternoon or an hour and a half, but it soon I suppose with, with Kemar and
Yeah.
Paul, etc.,
Yeah.
it soon became, well, it could just be an independent workshop. And a lot of practitioners came,
Yeah, yeah,
and some quite experienced practitioners. And
Yes.
well, that's happened twice now, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting.
Well, that's already this year in Sheffield. You've run this workshop twice, and
Yes.
it's filled
Yeah.
both times. It got a lot of
Yes.
Yeah.
a lot of interest.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that was during the week as well. I mean, if we had ran into the weekend, I think it'd be even.
Could be different, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, in some ways, that idea of making mistakes, I wonder if you had an idea of presenting it to newer counsellors, if you like, but it sounded like more experienced people came too. It was of interest across the field.
Yes.
Yes, well, at first it was almost a crisis. Oh my God, can we do a whole workshop on it? In a way. And of course, we thought we could, and it was offering people an opportunity or a space to explore mistakes. Hopefully an opportunity almost to confess mistakes. And I mean that in the sense of how it can be experienced these days of, dare I tell you that this is what I did? And it's quite clear, from some of the research on supervision, sometimes it's very hard to tell your supervisor.
Yeah.
Things. And I went to a fantastic session once by quite an eminent figure who lobbies for mental health for young people and does a lot of work for young people. And he was telling a story, and it was absolutely fascinating. But he didn't dare tell his own supervisor for 6 months about a particular incident, which was actually just an accident. It was an accident. And when we heard the story, it was quite hysterical to listen to, but you could also understand the anxiety it created.
Yeah.
So in a sense, though we have a wider notion that what actually is a mistake, and is a mistake, or is a mistake, it's an element of life to learn from. So there is that. That comes from the shamanic tradition, doesn't it? So it's a different conceptual framework to, have I offended a particular set of rules, laws, ethical obligations?
And so that word mistake, well, especially in the current paradigm, how things are in society, can strike fear and anxiety into
Absolutely.
us. But it sounds like mistake can feel quite differently in the shamanic tradition.
Well, it's also, but I think it's something that happens in psychotherapy. We set ourselves up to make mistakes, and then with our client, we can then delve into that and explore what the mistake was, and so that something comes out of it. There's a growth that comes out of it. So I think it's not just the shamanic, but it's also I think it's something that is the potential within therapy, that actually we need to make mistakes in the therapy, because it's out of making the mistakes that we then can find ways of relating to each other and find ways in which we can grow as individuals, both the therapist and the client.
So a therapeutic relationship without mistake or these learning experiences is not really the full rich experience.
Exactly.
We're looking to
And if the therapist is continually sort of looking over their shoulder and thinking, I mustn't make mistakes, then they're taking away something very rich from the potential from the relationship with their client.
And I suppose, I was trying to think, because that could sound quite odd, I could imagine, to some people listening, but there is a sense